Morning, everybody. How we doing today? The wife's feeling quite a bit better. It's been a tough 8 days, 9 days. Just even being quarantined from my wife in the same house. We talk over the phone or from across a couple rooms to each other. It's not fun. I've been making her food, dropping it off in her bathroom, saying, breakfast served for Kathy, like a cafe almost. We're trying to make the best of it, but it's not a fun thing. Thankfully, me and the kids have not seemed to have caught anything, so that's the good news. But I do want to touch on one thing before I jump into today's PB&J episode. Part of why I talk politics and social issues is I know the black community in the Twin Cities really well, and so a lot of that really hit home with me in the spring when that was happening. And then as COVID's done its thing, we here as a family don't just worry about us as a family. My wife runs the Rochester Homeless Center, and I've told you that before. But it covers the southern third of Minnesota. All the other small towns have shut anything homeless down and sent them all to Rochester. So she has a lot of broken, fractured people, addictions, drugs, violence, criminals, just broken dreams, depression, mental illness. There's so many fractures. And the stress it places on my wife, it transcends and comes home with her. So we're not just sitting here dealing with and processing our own stress and our own difficulties. Every day, the deficiencies of the system are a part of our plate. It's part of what we have to process and deal with and look at straight in the face. And so it's only natural for me to have an outlet to speak on it sometimes, because it's very stressful. It's very exhausting. It's worn me out. More than any other aspect of this year is that we're not just surviving as a family and trying to bunker down. We're seeing the larger deficiencies of the system and all the people who are very vulnerable and could easily catch it and spread in that community very quickly, which is actually happening right now. It's been a blessing in a bit. My wife's been out right now because it's really spreading around. But you can't help but at times sit and wonder how we could be doing so many things so poorly. And I don't have all the answers politically. I'm not a political scientist. I just have ideologies and beliefs and philosophies. And when I speak on economics, when I speak on politics, I'm not claiming to be an expert as much as I'm saying something's wrong. Something's broken. We're not seeing the representation of where our tax dollars should be helping us. And again, so for those of you who have an issue with my politics and have an issue with me bringing some of that stuff to the table, I challenge you to have your wife work in the homeless community for 6 months and then add a pandemic on top of it, and have you not see some of the deficiencies and the mass number of people who are broken, fractured, and not getting help. The homeless community has a lot of undiagnosed or unmedicated mental illness. There's a lot of depression, a lot of self-medication, a lot of anxiety, a lot of teary stories. It all gets dumped on my wife as the coordinator of all this. On top of that, she's going to the county and the city trying to advocate for them to get them more. And there's this constant pushback from the regular community citizenry that doesn't give a shit. They don't want to help. The county doesn't want to help. And so there's a lot of frustration on that level as well, seeing the bureaucracy fail. I answer to my constituents. My constituents have made it clear they don't care. And so there's a lot of struggling with bureaucracy trying to get provisions for them. And that's part of the frustration and broken system again. That's part of what we have to deal with every day. So every day on our plate as a family, we have to not just deal with our own personal struggles, but we're seeing the struggles of all the greater society here in America, for better or for worse. An upper elite that doesn't care, a middle class that tries to help, a lower class that's on the verge of being homeless all the time, and then a very large homeless community that kind of drifts through in and out. Some are permanently there because of their broken mentalities. Others are more temporary where they're trying to get back on their feet. But I promise you it's been an exhausting year having to add that burden on our family every day. The stress of her being in an unsafe environment. Fights break out. She's tough and she can handle herself in almost any situation, and she's really good at dissolving things. But there's been times I called the police and the police wouldn't even come. They had this one guy who was a COVID patient. They dumped on them in this one room. And this guy was running around without a mask, and he wouldn't listen to nobody. He was being belligerent and drunk. The police were called. They wouldn't come. So my wife, as a 38-year-old woman, has to figure out what she's going to do with this belligerent, drunk, positive person running around her community. It's and so part of what I've been venting and part of what I've been sharing is the destitute nature of so many people is still a real part of today's America. And the jazz that I listened to from the 50s and 60s and love is rooted in so much of what that black experience was with being not taken care of. I'll leave it at that. But that's partly why politics have been prevalent in my diatribes, why sometimes I open up with 15 minutes of politics. It's like, it's been on our plate every day. Every day we're seeing the shortfalls. And New Zealand, Denmark, Germany, Switzerland, Canada, so many countries have done so much better in these departments. And here we are, the richest tax base in the world, and we can't get kids textbooks. So, moving on, PB&J, a pop record, a blues record, and a jazz record. If you remember from the first PB&J episode, the pop can cover anything. It can be a pop jazz record, a pop R&B record. It can be whatever I feel like. The blues record can be anything from straight up blues to the rhythm and blues, even in the funk, maybe even hip hop down the road, we'll see. And then the jazz is going to be a jazz record that somehow relates or just feels like it's a good threesome. So today's first choice is one of my favorite records. It's by Sting. And I'm a reluctant Sting fan. I like the Police quite a lot, but I was never a huge fan. In the 80s, I was a metalhead. So I came to Police in the 90s, going backwards when I was collecting vinyl, got all 5 of the records, learned to really like them. I met my best friend Justin in 92, and he was a pretty big Sting fan. His mom was a big Sting fan. His mom was British. His dad was black Detroit jazz musician. And he's like, you should check out Sting. And I only kind of knew his singles on the radio, and I was never that enticed by that. I was never, oh, I need to have the Fields of Barley. Like that's my wheelhouse. But weirdly enough, about a year and a half ago, I was listening to this Danish group called Bliss, a really cool, mellow world soundscape. 2 of the people are from Guinea-Bissau in Africa. The other 2 are Danes. And it's just this really ethereal music that I absolutely love. Bliss has 4 or 5 albums that are just all outstanding. And I didn't have a way to play this stuff in my room anymore, so I started just to play it on Pandora. And on this Pandora station, a couple of Sting songs would start to pop up as the algorithm kept spreading out and more stuff got thumbed up or thumbed down. And I don't touch my stations as much. I could go days without thumbing up or thumbing down anything, but slowly a few Sting songs started showing up. Fragile was one of them, which is one of my favorite songs in the world now. That's Not the Shape of My Heart from the record after this is one of my favorite songs in the world. And of course Nas samples it. So when I heard it the first time on Pandora, I was like, I know this. Why do I know this? And of course the Nas lyrics started kicking in. I'm like, oh my God, that's why I know this. And it's this really great classical guitar player who plays with Sting on a number of these records at this point, who's fantastic. Just plays these beautiful melodic sounds. Anyway, Dream of Blue Turtles was the first Sting record, and I'm not that familiar with it, to be honest. I know the Sting records much well, but it was this record, and then the one after it with Fields of Barley and not the Shape of My Heart. That record, what's the name of it? I can't think of right now. It's got the barley field on the cover. And Anyway, I really fell in love with those two records especially. And tracks like Fragile are just outstanding. And it was recorded in Montserrat in the Caribbean. And what's interesting about this record is how much it embraces all of the sounds that are out there, from reggae to pop to R&B to world to calypso. There's just a lot of interesting things happening. And then one of the other things that was really remarkable to me about this record is it's very intricately produced. There's a lot of very intricate percussion, especially to the point where you would think Sting must have been a drummer in the Police, but of course he was the bass player, and his bass playing is never really front and center. And that's not to say he's not a fine bass player or that he's not good. It just doesn't seem to be the purpose of what he's ever doing. He's just playing an appropriate bass line, and he's never putting a lot of flair or extra activity into his bass playing. It's just very much kind of a basic necessity, but the percussion seems like it's so intricately woven. And I see the studio musicians on this are top notch, and there's some jazz elements at times, and there's one song that was a big hit, and this often happens where the studio says, we don't really hear a hit, we need you to make one that'll be a kind of a crossover song. And and the one hit that he made to be a single on this was We'll Be Together. And it sounds like Paula Abdul, it sounds like Duran Duran, it sounds like Peter Gabriel, it sounds like Janet Jackson. It's a pitfall when, as an artist, the label forces you to make a song that's commercial, because the production that will end up sounding like what's contemporary with that at that time, and that's going to end up being the one song that sounds really dated on the record, and boy does it ever. It sticks out like a sore thumb. The whole record has this wonderful, global, sentient, philosophical feel to it, and then this just feels like weird Peter Gabriel, Paula Abdul pop. And it's still great songs, still great production. It's just very dated compared to the rest of the piece. It's a double LP, and I can honestly say that there's a half dozen songs on this record that are outstanding. And Lazarus Heart's fantastic. Englishman in New York is fantastic. They Dance Alone. History Will Teach Us Nothing. Fragile. Little Wing, the Hendrix song. It's really filled with a lot of great songwriting and very interesting production. And I listened to it in the car a lot, this album, when I was traveling to the cities DJing last year. And I was just amazed by some of the really complex percussion. Just interesting rhythms that are layered over each other that somehow all meet at the one at some point. It's very sophisticated in its rhythmic structures, and it's got great melodic structuring as well, and good pop sensibility, and it's honestly an outstanding record. And that's coming from a guy who has never really been a big Sting fan. And then Fragile, to me, is the centerpiece, and it just moves me. It's exactly what pop music can do. It says something, and it talks about how vulnerable and fragile life here on our planet is. And it's just beautiful. And Be Still My Beating Heart has that. The song from the other record. That's Not the Shape of My Heart. That song also just moves me. And then obviously he did a record in 2000 or so that had the great Jaguar commercial song. And then 10,000 Years, I think it's called, or maybe 1,000 Years, and that's also outstanding as well. But it's really, really well produced, really, really well thought out. And that's Fragile right there. It's just gorgeous, almost flamenco-like guitar. And I don't want to get censored, so I'm going to cut that out there. But the next thing I want to talk about is my blues record. And for this, we're going to do what's a real fusion of jazz, soul jazz, R&B, and blues. And that's the great Booker T and the MGs. One of the house bands for the Stax label out of Memphis, Tennessee, and these guys backed a lot of the great soul funk records of that time. Booker T heard Abbey Road by the Beatles in '69, listened within a week of it coming out, and he was so moved by it and impressed by it because he felt it had risk in it. It was very honest and very fresh, and he immediately got the band together and they retrack most of Abbey Road, and it's called Macklemore Avenue because that's where the Stax label is located in Memphis, and they obviously replicate the cover to some degree. And the band, of course, Donald Duck Dunn, and they're all legends. Steve Cropper, trying to think of the drummer's name, but they're all legends of the soul scene. And what they do is they put what jazz did to a lot of pop music. They put that black cool on it, and they really just kind of put a pocket and a little funky remix on one of the great records of all time. And it's not an easy thing to do, to remix the Beatles or to even try to play the Beatles. But they do it respectfully. They do it very compellingly. I just enjoy listening to it. The version of Come Together, which is coming up here in a little bit. It's just got a little extra groove in it. And Come Together is one of the great grooves of all time anyway. It's one of the great pop songs of all time. And that Come Together is as rooted in the blues and the black sound as anything the Beatles ever did. It's such a great song. If you think about how it operates, it's just a loop that just kind of links and syncs back up with itself and does it over and over again. The drums, the bass, the guitar, it's all just these patterns that kind of are looping. And Come Together is one of the great songs ever written. It's just really, I've played it many, many times as a DJ for just the right time in an event. You can feel like the crowd's 80% there. That's a good time to drop in some Come Together at a holiday party or a work, gathering. It brings almost everybody in because Beatles are very non-exclusive. You don't have to be a big Beatle fan to be very familiar with a lot of their work. So it's a fun remix project, and it's interesting to see the black community being so on top of what the Beatles were up to, and that just shows you some of the power the Beatles had. They remixed this record within weeks of it coming out. And so if you have a chance to grab Macklemore Avenue, and if you see it out there, it's got a great cover, nice gatefold, it's got the traditional Stax yellow label. It's definitely a record that's worth grabbing and soaking up. And again, it illustrates, just like jazz and the blues, how interwoven the fabric of North American music is, especially. And you can link European tradition with that as well, because it's the Europeans who come to America and bring the blues back to America through a white lens. But it's certainly, you see how interwoven the fabric of North American black music is and how it permeates throughout decades elements of all the pop and R&B that happens. The blues and jazz stands at the bottom of all of that, both in principle, in formula, in how it creates an emotional response, and how it speaks for the people who are making it. It's pretty unique. Now, the jazz record I want to talk about today is, to me, one of the great records that is really underappreciated. And if I told you there was a Kind of Blue prequel done by pretty much the same group, most of you would be like, that's not true. And it's not totally true. But at this point, Cannonball Adderly was obviously in Miles' sextet. And they're about to do the tracking for Kind of Blue. And of course, Bill Evans comes in the studio and displaces Wynton Kelly for a lot of those sessions because Wynton didn't meet what Miles was looking for Wynton's more of a blues groove player, and Miles wanted the modal George Russell thing, and so he dismissed Kelly for the sessions largely. I think Kelly's on one of the tracks, but he's been recording as a leader in Chicago for the Emercy label since 1956, and he's got 5 or 6 really great records on Emercy that really go under the radar, and you can get them all original pressings for under $100, and some of them you can, if you're lucky, you'll find them for 30, depending on the pressing. The monos go for more than the stereos do, but Cannonball is finishing out his contract with Mercury. He's about to move over to Riverside and really take his own star to the next level. And of course, Miles helps elevate that guy's career like he did with many others. But it's in that moving to Chicago to make this last session where he brings Miles' group with him. He brings John Coltrane. He brings Paul Chambers. He brings Jimmy Cobb. He brings Wynton Kelly. And so the quintet, that's basically Miles' backing group without him, records this record. And it's got some hard bop-ish numbers. It's got a couple blues numbers. It's got some fantastic up-tempo playing, a couple ballads. And you have the very serious nature of John Coltrane kind of debating almost with the light, joyous nature of Cannonball Adderly. Adderly's a light, spry fruit. He's very full of juice and full of just personality, and it's almost got riddles and jokes to his playing. He's a joyous figure, and he just has a joy in playing that he really expresses really well, whether it's on ballads or up-tempos. And Coltrane's much more monotone emotionally, eyes closed. It's a very serious, sincere intercession via prayer to the Creator. And I've talked about Coltrane many times. But they've also got a rapport because they've played together live with Miles' group for a while. So this group is locked in. Kelly's outstanding. Chambers is outstanding. Jimmy Cobb is outstanding. And of course, Kelly, Cobb, and Chambers leave in unison Miles' group the next year and record as a trio for a long time. And they make some great records at Verve and other places. That trio that was Miles' rhythm section at that point, they all leave together. And it leaves Miles kind of in a lurch. Coltrane's left. Adderly's onto his own thing now with his groups. And my rhythm section's all moved on as well. People complain about me complaining about Miles sometimes, but the evidence is there. He wasn't a fun person to be around. And it's just hard to talk about him and not reflect on some of those personality traits, because I think it comes across not only in his music but in the people who interact with him. But what a fun record this is. And it's not modal. It's not like they're sitting doing the kind of blues sound, but you get to hear that same driving group playing in a different setting without the Miles direction, as it were. And Miles was definitely directing studio work. He was very in control. And this feels loose, free, fun, energetic. Coltrane, lovely on a ballad here. Is this Stars Fall in Alabama? I believe it is. Yeah. Wabash is on here. Grand Central, You're a Weaver of My Dreams, The Sleeper. There's 6 tracks. And I hate the cover. I'll be very honest with you. I can't stand the cover. It's that kind of 60s, 70s kids book almost, cut and paste. I don't like it. But it was the end of his contract with Mercury, Emercy, and I'm sure they didn't really care. And I'm sure he was just happy to get out of his contract and move on to greener pastures at the Riverside label, where he was going to be one of the big names at Riverside. Monk and Evans were 2 stars, but Monk was full of those angles, and Evans was full of his minimalistic dreamscapes, and Adderly had real commercial potential. And he has a couple decent sized hits while at Riverside. And then he eventually moves on to Capitol and has even more commercial success there. So you gotta love Cannonball Adderley. He's a very important part of the jazz canon. Most of his body of work, especially his Blue Note record, his Emerson stuff, his stuff at Mercury towards the end there, and then all of his Riverside canon. It's high level, contemplative, imaginative, fun. He darts about. He darts about. He plays that alto a bit like a fairy's on the wings. He's sprinkling pixie dust as he goes. There's not a lot of guys that sound like Cannonball Adderley. And what he brings even to Kind of Blue and the Miles group, he brings a real warm intensity. It's not that harsh intensity of Coltrane. It's a warm intensity. It's fun. It's full of life and vigor and sprightly. So again, it's a record that's kind of becoming more sought out now, and its prices are starting to climb. It'll be $60 to $100 now, I think, in most times. It's something you used to see pretty frequently for real low numbers. You used to see it under $20 back in the day, but now anything that's got John Coltrane on it, it's a bit like Hank Mobley. You have that name on there, it's going to really elevate what you have to pay for it, even if he's a sideman. Great record. In spite of the cover, it's a great record. It's a great chapter in that center of jazz with Coltrane, with Miles, with Cannonball, with Wynton Paul, all the cats. It's right in that center moment in 59, 58, where things are really starting to take on new directions and exciting angles. And it's a definite important piece of the canon. And if you see it for under $50, don't hesitate to grab it. And if you don't, I wouldn't pay more than $100 for it, because you will find it for less than that. And it's, again, Mercury had 2 distribution presses. They printed a lot of records, and so these records traveled around the country well compared to most jazz labels. They had really good distribution, and so you should be able to find Mercury stuff almost everywhere in the country far easier than you can a Blue Note or a Prestige or even any of those smaller labels. Argo doesn't have the same distribution that its sister label in Chicago did, and so that helps determine the cost of things. Part of why Blue Notes cost so much, sure, there's a magic there, but they're rare. They didn't travel the nation. They stayed in one little regional area, and they traveled somewhat in reissues and repressings, but the originals were very small and high in demand nowadays. But stuff that's on Columbia or Verve or Mercury that had fairly good distribution, those prices are always going to be affected by the fact that there's 25 other copies out there. For Kind of Blue, at any time, there's got to be 100 copies out there to be purchased. Old Columbia pressings. This one's not that common, but you certainly will find it. And I certainly saw it enough in record stores over the years to know that it was a fairly well distributed album. Anyway, enough on that. So, the Sting record's really great. Aside from that one Poppy song, We'll Be Together, which to me sounds very dated and archaic, the rest of the record still holds up incredibly well. And there's a half dozen tracks on there that are as good as anything Pop has ever done to me. It's just that good. The Macklemore record by the Beatles, it's fun. The Booker T, it's a fun record, and it's something you'll enjoy changing your oil in the car. It's just got that light, fun, swinging black remix element to it that just makes it worthwhile to have. And then this record, as we just talked about, it's a great record and an important part of the foundations of this music. So anyway, I'm the Jazz Shepherd. My name is Dan. There is some new merchandise now at the Teespring Jazz merchandise page, which is in the links below. You can also go to Patreon and pledge $5, $10 to support. I was providing a journal there, but it just wasn't getting enough views for the work I was putting into it. So you're just kind of thanking me for my time and effort if you want to go to Patreon, which is appreciated. It's been a tough year. I haven't had any work all year, basically, because I'm a DJ, and who's doing events? Who's hiring DJs right now? I'll be the last guy to go back to work. it'll probably be midsummer for people to start really doing events and wanting bars at full capacity. And until then, I'm here eating my scraps, my scribblings. But we getting by. We blessed. And like I talked to my friend Jean-Michel the other day, my grandparents lived through the wars, and my parents were born at the tail end of the Second War. And I have that knowledge firsthand of what struggle really looks like, not knowing if you're going to wake up tomorrow. And so whenever I want to get too self-pity filled, I can think of what that generation went through, and the fear and the terror and the exhaustion that was part of their daily routine. And I can even think of my childhood when I was 12, 13, and we were on really hard times for a couple of years in Manitoba. I've talked about that in some episodes. I know what it's like to be hungry. I know what it's like to have flour and water pancakes for a week at a time. A can of peaches from someone in the church donated was a luxury. We had our little fire. We had to go cut wood. Our fireplace heated our big home out in the hills. We had no electricity for weeks on end at times in the cold Manitoba winters. So it was a tough trial. But at the same time, I've leaned on that experience a lot during this year. I've looked back on that, and I can tell you this, that even from the worst times, the most stressful times, the most dastardly times, what you will end up remembering is the good moments. And from that tough 2 years, some of my best childhood memories come from that time, because it forced our family together as a unit. We sat together around the fire, around the TV, watching Hockey Night in Canada, watching silly little shows, movies. And when you did have a nice meal, you valued it, you appreciated it. You didn't take it for granted, that's for sure. So I know tough times on some level, and I've definitely leaned on that to help me get through this year. But again, keep us in your thoughts and prayers. My wife's job is not going to get any easier for the foreseeable future, and it does keep us in a very tense place. And that's why I think I vent a lot of that stuff here, is there's just a lot. We're not just carrying our own load, we're carrying the load of a broken system that impacts our daily routine every day. Every day some drama hits her, and it ends up hitting our family, because we have to all deal with it and coach her through it. And it's just part of our routine. And it's hard not to comment on, boy, it sure would be nice if we took care of some things better. So I appreciate all your insight. I appreciate all your feedback and comments, guys. It's been wonderful. We'll talk to you all soon. Peace.